We have a major Mitch Marner trade update, as in a recent report by Chris Johnston, he revealed the truth on Mitch Marner's future in Toronto, and what he had to say may surprise you. So I'm going to break all that down in this episode, as well as discuss Craig Berube and Brad Treliving. They also spoke out on the Stars' future in Toronto, and what they had to say is very, very interesting. So stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we do, if you're a part of the large percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button as we keep you up to date with all the latest Maple Leafs news. But Darius, a lot to go over today. Obviously, Mitch Marner trade talks have been the main talking point of the offseason, and really, nothing crazy has happened yet. We both thought a trade would probably have gone down by now. It's July 8th. Obviously, free agency started about literally a week ago today on Canada Day. And now we're talking about some new reports that have surfaced from Chris Johnston, as well as Craig Berube and Brad Treliving. They spoke out, and let's start with Craig Berube to kind of set the stage here. And he had this to say on Mitch Marner when asked about him. He said, quote, "He's a character guy. He's a great person. Obviously a great player. I'm looking forward to coaching him," end quote. Very interesting, Darius. Now, obviously, Mitch Marner, a trade could easily still happen, but from what all signs are pointing to at this point, it almost seems like, at least according to Craig Berube and Brad Treliving, which we'll get into in a minute, and a report by Chris Johnston, it seems like Mitch Marner may be staying in Toronto. At least that's their plan right now, probably because of the no-move clause, and they haven't gotten a sufficient offer to please them.
Yeah, personally, I'm starting to get used to the fact and get ready for life with Mitch Marner again on the Toronto Maple Leafs next year, whatever that may look like, because obviously there's been no contract talks. And we talked in the past about how Brad Treliving has used different language than what he was using with William Nylander last offseason. It doesn't sound like Mitch Marner is exactly a priority to get signed, right? This season, heading into next season and the season after that. We have no idea what's going to happen. And there's lots of talks. We've talked about, posturing through the media with his agent about them possibly walking after next season. But anyway, to go back a little bit to what Craig Berube said, he's not wrong. This is a very good player. I've never said that he's a bad player. I just don't think that with the salary cap structure the Leafs have right now, they can keep a player like that who doesn't perform in the playoffs. They kind of have to move on and get different pieces using his salary to make the team better. I don't think he's a bad player. I think you do great somewhere else, maybe even win a Stanley Cup on a different team, right? And Craig Berube does have to say stuff like that when he's first hired, right? This guy is still a part of the Toronto Maple Leafs roster. He has not been traded yet. Obviously, there's talks. Personally, I think at this point, it's either Vegas or it's not going to happen. It sounds like Vegas would be the only place at this point he would waive to go to. So it's looking less and less likely. And I think all Leaf fans, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whatever you think, are going to have to start preparing for life with Mitch Marner on the Toronto Maple Leafs next season.
Yeah, which I know is going to disappoint a lot of fans watching right now. And you can see Brad Treliving spoke out and said, "No update on Mitch. Mitch is a great player. We're lucky to have him." Craig alluded to it at his last press availability. He's excited to coach him, and we move forward. Mitch is training, preparing, getting ready for this season, which, again, all signs right now, that's the general manager talking, who could trade him and will be the guy to trade him if he ultimately gets moved, that he will be a Leaf. But something more interesting than that is a report by Chris Johnston when he said that the Leafs talked to Jeff Skinner before he ultimately signed elsewhere, pitched him on the idea of playing next to Matthews and Mitch Marner, and ultimately he chose the Edmonton Oilers, who maybe in Jeff Skinner's mind have a better chance to win the Cup considering they were there last year. But Darius, if you read the second part of this, where he said they pitched the idea of playing next to Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner, if you read between the lines, you can see this from Jeff Villette. If this is true, the biggest story isn't Skinner saying no. He picked McDavid, fair enough. If, quote, "you can play with Marner," end quote, is the part of the free agent pitch, that should put any thoughts of him seriously pushing to move him this summer to rest. Now, this is the big interesting thing that came out of this, is that in Chris Johnston's report, we obviously knew they were going to pursue Jeff Skinner. It was really, quite frankly, a perfect fit for the Toronto Maple Leafs, especially after Tyler Bertuzzi left. But it makes sense that he picked to play with Connor McDavid, the best player in the world. But the point is, pitching him to play next to Matthews and Marner, they wouldn't do that if they were actively trying to trade Mitch Marner away, or at least if they thought they had any package that was going to happen. Now, maybe because Jeff Skinner didn't play, now maybe they shift their focus back to trading Mitch Marner. It was kind of one or the other thing, but it seems like at this point, they're not going to pitch him to Jeff Skinner, then just ship him off.
Yeah, I think anything is still possible, although I think it's less likely that Marner gets traded now. But if you're pitching to guys in free agency to come to your team to play with certain players, and then you move those certain players, if you were to sign that free agent, that looks terrible on the organization. You can't do that. You can't say, "Hey, come here and play with Mitch Marner," and then 2 weeks later you trade Mitch Marner. It just doesn't work like that. So I'm starting to prepare, like I said, for Mitch Marner to be on the team this year. And honestly, like, to go way back, I think it's a problem with management. I'm not going to blame the player, right? Like I said, I do think that the Leafs might be better without Mitch Marner, at least in the playoffs, but they should have traded this player and gotten, freed up that salary cap space last year when they could have. Now they're in this situation where you have to walk him into free agency essentially this season, and he might end up walking, or maybe you trade his rights or something like that, right? So it could get a little messy, and I think that does fall on not necessarily current management and the GM, but maybe Brandon Shanahan, right? Could have moved off of this player last year. So it creates a little bit of this mess where now, they're telling other players, hey, come here and you can play with Mitch Marner. You can put up all these points, but what happens after this season, I think, is where it could get a little messy.
Yeah, I mean, they should have moved him when they could have without the no move clause being in effect. But again, you look at the quotes, you look at Mitch Marner's stats here. Again, we bring this up whenever we talk about him. He's still a very good player, and obviously the core four has run stale for most. It's run its course for most fans, and that's why. And they haven't won any playoff series besides one a couple years ago. But he's still an 85-point player, and I know that Brad Treliving, if they don't think they're going to get their proper value out of him, they're not going to move him, and that's why I think this is the play, and maybe this is why they're making the play. I don't think it's the right play necessarily, but I also think that they're going to keep, having a pitch of Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner to other free agents is still very important and good, despite the fact they haven't won any playoff series. I'm sure Jeff Skinner almost picked the Leafs, or we're somewhat close to picking the Leafs. And especially when Brad Treliving is being, I wouldn't say cryptic about it necessarily, but he just is kind of avoiding the question. We're not going to address it. On the first day he was eligible to sign an extension, there was no update on Mitch Marner. And Darius, that's why I want to bring this up. It's a good segue. If they're not going to trade him, I think they might have to extend him at this point, because you cannot let the player leave for nothing, even though he's going to cost a lot of money. If you're going with the thought of keeping him and not trading him, then you almost have to make an effort to extend him, whether that's at 10 million. It's going to start to hurt a little bit as you get over 10 million, but I cannot imagine a world where it actually plays out like Darren Ferris wanted, like we got a report a month or so ago, where he's going to play it out and then maybe leave in free agency. That would be the worst case scenario, and I'd have to assume an extension is going to be coming, and if not, I don't know what they're doing at this point, unless Mitch Marner truly doesn't want to extend with the Leafs, which would be even worse if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, debatably depending how much the contract is.
That's just the thing, though, right? And that's why I brought up last year, because you probably should have moved on from this player, because now you put yourself in this position, right, where you can't really move on from this player without a lot of hiccups and having to ask him where he wants to go, right, and waiving no movement clauses and all that. And now you're probably going to have to extend him, like you said. I don't think he's going to take a pay cut. I really don't think this player wants to. I think he wants a raise, if anything. And it can't work for the Leafs. So you might get like a Gensel situation, which is a little bit different. I understand that, where you just trade his rights or something, but you're not going to get much return for that. Like Gensel only fetched a 3rd-round pick, I believe. So that is a very terrible scenario for the Leafs, right? You want some type of return, and the longer he stays a Leaf through this offseason, the more likely it looks that he will return, and less likely that he'll be traded at all, because to move an $11 million player during the season, I just don't think it's feasible in this NHL right now with the way the salary cap is, right? Maybe in a couple of years as the salary cap goes up and continues to go up, but I just don't think it's possible in season. And if you get to next offseason, you're basically going to have to trade his rights. So it's a very interesting situation. I don't think I had to get to this point. They could have moved off the player last year, because I think you had your answer in terms of playoff success last year. And they just let it get to this point. So it's going to be a really interesting year. And it kind of sucks too, because this is going to be a talking point the entire season. It's going to be a little exhausting. So not looking forward to that specifically, but hopefully it does get resolved one way or another.
Yeah, and some teams linked: Vegas, Nashville, Chicago, and Dallas. So we're going to keep an eye out on those teams. And Vegas, I think, is the one at this point that if a trade goes down, it is most likely to happen. But let us know in the comments, do you want to see Mitch Marner traded? Are you upset that he's probably going to stay on the Toronto Maple Leafs at this upcoming season? Let us know in the comment section. See you soon.